you have a guy to your right. Maybe most everybody knows them here in Chautauqua, but maybe not. So, John, why don't you introduce Mark?
This is Michael Starks. He's the superintendent of our Chautauqua Utility District.
And that's all you're going to say about him? You got much more?
He's a wonderful person. He also is a brewmeister up at Big Inlet Brewery. So you have all kinds of biology background, and he knows way more than I do about himself. So you might want to ask him. But he's been excellent
about that.
Took Tom Cherry's place. Tom was fantastic, and he's been followed by someone else fantastic. So we're all real happy to have him at the utility district. He's been helpful on all regards, and we still have a great cooperative relationship between the utility district and Chautauqua Institution.
I grew up in Cattaraugus, New York, and I lived there till I was, 6th or 7th grade, and then moved out into the big bustling metropolis of East Otto, and I lived there till I attended JCC, and I got an associate's in biology, and I met my wife. She moved into the apartment that I lived in. She moved in downstairs, and I lived upstairs, and I came with the apartment. So, and she was born here in Mayville, or lived in Mayville all her life. So we kind of ended up here. So not too far away.
Did you kind of like meet in the laundromat? How'd that happen?
Actually, she invited me to a party, and back then I worked at a job I had to wear a suit like this all day, and so I think I was looking pretty good, maybe. No, so she invited me to a party, and I had lived at that apartment for 3 or 4 years, and the first party that she threw, the police were called, and it was chaos, but the rest is history. So
Talk to me more. Was there some of the stuff that you're now brewing at that party?
Probably, yeah. Definitely a little bit of it. I might have been the only one over age at the time, but no, I'm just. So we got married a few years later, and we have 3 kids, and we live in Mayville, and they keep us pretty busy. So,
how did you connect with this place here, the Chautauqua Utility District?
Well, going to school, actually, when I was attending college, I went to Westfield's water treatment plant, and we studied the plant, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And at the time, while I was going to college, I was working for some dealerships in the area. I was a service writer and then a parts manager of a dealership. And a friend of mine, a mutual friend, she said, "Oh, my dad runs this water treatment plant at the institution, and they're always looking for part-time guys in the summer if it's something that you might be interested in doing." And at the time, we didn't have children, or Ethan was real little, and I started working nights. I'd work 50 hours a day at my regular job, and then I'd drive over from Westfield over here, and then I'd stay here till 1, 2 in the morning pumping water, working at the water treatment plant. And after a couple of summers of that, actually the dealership I worked for went out, and they offered me a full-time position here. So it's been coming up on 13 years that I've been here.
So you are the superintendent of operations of the Chautauqua Utility District. What does the district consist of?
District consists of a water treatment facility, a wastewater treatment facility, and most recently we have purchased all the street lights in Chautauqua, and we're doing a modernization project of those to go up to all LED. It's the first time that National Grid has ever sold assets to an entity. So it was kind of a historic thing. We went up to Buffalo, I guess it was probably 2 months ago now, and signed a contract with them to purchase the street lights off them so we can get rid of the old mercury halides and all those horrible lights that look like you're in Rich Stadium or something. So, and put something a little more modern, a little more pleasant to look at. So that's been a big undertaking. The last few months has been pretty interesting for us. We went out to bid to contractors, and we went out to bid on the actual light, the different lights that we could use. And we've got a few demonstration lights around the grounds that you can see. There's a few up along Massey that are one style. There's a few along North Lake that are the other style that we're looking to go with. So, and that'll happen pretty quick. Probably at least half of them will be up before the season. Long lead time on the other one's going to take a little longer to to get those installed. It might be just after the season before we can get the rest of them in. They're coming from Italy. If we do end up going with that company, they're coming from Italy, and they're about 25 weeks out, so between production and shipment. So we now own 223 streetlights and 112 light poles. The light poles that don't have any transmission lines, we purchased off National Grid. So we have, like I said, we have a water plant, a wastewater plant, and the street lighting. But we provide water and wastewater in and around the institution. The institution is our biggest customer by far, but we have about between 1,300 and 1,400 accounts. And then we supply water to the town of Chautauqua for the Chautauqua Shores. And there's about 75 homes there. We also have an agreement with Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, or the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, excuse me, to accept their sewage from like Prendergast Point back to our plant. There's no way for them to go gravity or to pump from that end back to Mayville where that plant is. So we accept their sewage and then bill them back for it. We're actually working on another 40-year contract. It came up the end of this last year, and we extended it a little bit so we can work on a new contract with them to continue to provide that service to them. So,
What's the history behind the utility district? I understand it's been around quite a long time.
Yeah. So back in when the institution started, they took care of their own water and sewer. At the time, they had pumps, obviously, and like hand pumps for water. And then they put in the sewer system because of health reasons. Back then, it was carrying pots around, and it was not very sanitary. So they put in the sewer system in the late 1800s. I'm not sure the date. It was 1875.
76, I think.
And then
Wow.
it actually is the first fully sewered community in the United States, which is pretty crazy. And a lot of the mains are still original on the sewer side of that. And they built the water plant in the 20s, and it was all DC because of Thomas Edison being here and everything in the institution at the time was DC power. So we've got some cool old pictures of the old pumps that were all where DC, and at some point they changed that over. I'm not sure when, but so up until just before the Depression, the institution, they obviously were a bright group. They realized that you have all these homes here, and that if the institution failed and the institution went down, you're still going to have a ton of homes and people, property owners here. And they realized that they needed to do something to separate that. And actually, it was Eleanor Roosevelt who walked our charter through Congress. I don't know what it was in the 30s to get a charter for us as a special municipal district. So we're not technically a municipality, but we are a special municipal district, we're considered. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
So you got Thomas Edison, you got Eleanor Roosevelt, and you have John Shedd. Those are the big three, aren't they? And who were you rooting for during the NCAA tournament?
I was rooting for the Bulls, but they went out early. I thought they were going to go farther. So
So can you tell us a little bit about the guy from Purdue University? Can you explain to me who he is and what he means to you?
he is the vice president of campus and planning here, and he's handsome, obviously. He, he has taken on some big undertakings here with the Amphitheater project, and he's somebody that I talk to quite frequently, and someone that I actually really look up to, and he has just to see him carry himself and how he does business. It's been a good thing for me to be able to kind of talk to him and get some ideas on stuff and how to handle things. So it's been really cool. So
Thanks.
Well, while everybody's getting out their handkerchiefs, John, how did you get connected with Chautauqua Institution? You have an extensive background in architecture.
Yeah, so my wife's originally from Jamestown, and so I used to come here to visit quite often. Even before we got married, we used to come and visit each other as friends, you know. And so I really liked Chautauqua Lake, and I had been working for a company that put me all over the country on different projects. Did projects in Houston, Los Angeles, Chicago, St. Louis, all over the place, and. The next stop for me was going to be Kuwait at the end of the first Gulf War. And I was all excited about the idea because of the adventure. I was going to be put in charge of the project management for putting out oil well fires after the Gulf War that Saddam Hussein had started. And I had just gotten married. And it was a 5-year single status assignment. And I thought, this is probably not a good idea. And so we came here on vacation to enjoy the lake and visit my wife's parents who still live here, fantastic people. And while we were checking out what we were going to do, thinking about what the plan was going to be going forward, my father-in-law, he was a dentist in town, he's retired now, and he pulled me aside. I was actually literally water skiing on the lake, and he waves me in, and he goes, "I got you an interview." And I said, "I'm not really looking for a job." And he goes, "Just go, just go to the interview and see what they say." So I ended up accepting a job at Habitatera Associates Architects in Jamestown here, and I worked there for about 9 years, and my wife was very unhappy that I took the job initially, but now we all love it here. It's a great place. And so I worked with Habitatera for quite a few years, and then I became a partner at a company called the Thomas Group, which we had offices all over the Northeast. We had 13 offices. I opened and ran the Jamestown and Buffalo, New York offices, and also helped with the startup of the Rochester, New York office. And so did a lot of projects there. But then we sold the company, and then it was a new opportunity to think about what are we going to do now. And so I joined another local firm as a partner with R.W. Larson Architects, and worked with R.W. Larson, and their big focus had been on the financial projects, the banks and credit unions. And when the credit union market and the bank market hit a wall back in 07, 08, we lost a lot of clients in the first week that all that happened, and we were still functioning well, but I found out, you might remember Charlie Hines used to be the vice president of development, campus planning, basically what I do, and I met him during one of my trips up here to see if I could get some project work for my architectural firms. And I told him before I left, I said, I want your job someday when I'm ready to retire. It's a nice, interesting job. Well, I found out that he was retiring. And I immediately called up here, and I had told my partners, I said, hey, we have too many partners to sustain this business. One of us really should think about going somewhere else. And it's going to be me. So I ended up being fortunate to take Charlie Hines' position. And so I'm closing in on my 9th summer here now.
Did he leave you the Prince of Forbes Field? That was a big thing on Charlie's office. Is it still there?
It's in the archives. It's not there, but yes, it's in the archives.
Okay. So you've been here for working towards 9 years, and John, in the not recent past, you're engaged in perhaps one of the biggest projects in the history of Chautauqua, and the amphitheater. Did you know what you were getting into when you got into this?
Well, it's funny. When they were interviewing me, I was originally just going to take Charlie Hines' position. At that point, he was the administrator of architectural and land use regulations. And that's the person who checks on the private homeowner projects to make sure that they comply with the architectural and land use regulations. And that was really kind of a part-time job. And so I suggested that they use my other capabilities, because I have a background in construction management and I'm also a licensed architect. And I said, why don't you utilize my services for the architectural and land use regulations, but also let's use my skills as a construction manager and an architect and make this a full-time job. And so they all kind of looked at each other because it looked like something was up when the light went on when I said that. And so then I was fortunate to get hired under Tom Becker and working with Sebi Bajano and Doug Conroe. The first week that I was here, Tom Becker walks into my office and he opens the door and he says, I need you to maybe sit in on a meeting that you might be interested in. And I said, okay, sure. So I walk in and it's the very first meeting for the amphitheater project. And so I'm just listening, what's going on. And at the very end, he says, does anybody have any questions? And so I hadn't known anything about what was going on with that project. And I raised my hand. I go, why aren't you just building a new one across the highway? Well, you would have thought that I had just committed the ultimate sin. I thought I was going to get fired on the spot. But then from that moment, it was nonstop. I'm still working on the amphitheater project. Since the day I started here, pretty much, I've been working on that project. And so it's been quite an endeavor, definitely.
Are you going to write a book on this, the trials and tribulations of the amphitheater?
I would love to if I had time or the memory.
Yeah.
I mean, most of it's written down somewhere on small pieces of notepaper shoved in a drawer somewhere because it went so fast. I mean, you would think that this many years later it wasn't fast, but it was a very fast-paced operation that we went through, from the planning all the way through construction, obviously.
So, but it also had some controversy that went with that. Did you get caught up in that controversy, or did leave that to the administration?
No, I was heavily caught up in it. It was my decision to make a recommendation to our executive staff and to our board what to do with the amphitheater based on the information that we had gathered from all the studies that we did. We had structural issues, severe structural issues at the old amphitheater. We had all kinds of problems there with the building itself. It was basically sliding into Chautauqua Lake from the hillside that it was on. It's built over a ravine, and that ravine obviously has soil and underpinnings that are moving toward the lake, as nature does. And so the amount of time that we had to build something and renovate, combined with the condition of that facility, led me to suggest to the institution that we could consider building a new structure there. And so I was involved in that decision to begin with. The board backed me up on that after they saw all the data behind it. We went to some extensive lengths of showing the board, the staff, and the community what was going on with that building. We hired a historic preservation structural engineer to come in and do an analysis, and they basically agreed with where we were headed with this. But there were some organizations that were against the project. Obviously, the National Trust for Historic Preservation was giving us a hard time on it because their whole intent is to preserve a building. But our intent was to preserve a legacy of a cultural historic background that Chautauqua had, and that being our main venue for Chautauqua from almost the early days of Chautauqua going forward. We felt that it needed to be there because it was the heartbeat of the community right there in the center of the community. And so the decision was to preserve the historic culture. We are a National Historic Landmark, designated by the National Park Service. So we have all kinds of documentation about that. And the amphitheater is a contributing structure to that National Historic Landmark. And that means that individual building could also have its own registry. But because it's a district, all of the buildings that are referenced as being contributing structures are considered historic landmarks. So we tried to do everything we could to preserve whatever we could. And so the opposition got strong, and we had a very small group, but a vocal group of people who were adamantly against it and put a legal action against us to stop the project. And so I had to testify at the state Supreme Court on behalf of Chautauqua Institution, and my testimony ended up being the right testimony. the legal counsel for the plaintiff, they asked me to explain what the amphitheater looks like today. And it happened to be at a time when we had just put up cross bracing to hold the building up. And I kind of knew what he was getting at. I think he wanted me to explain the ambiance, you know, how beautiful this amphitheater is. But I said, you mean today? And he said, yes, please tell us what it looks like today. I said, there are cross braces that are hanging from each column top to each column bottom that's holding the building up. And part of the columns are leaning toward the lake. And we just had a structural collapse of one of our sections of roofing. Well, he didn't want to hear that answer, but that's what the answer was. And so the judge pretty quickly right after that ruled in our favor that the project should move forward. So it was pretty interesting, exhausting, but interesting.
So you're talking about the Chautauqua amp sliding into the lake. And Chautauqua Institution has taken an active leadership role. They've self-described steward of Chautauqua Lake. Were you part of that whole policy decision that Chautauqua always enjoyed and participated, but now you're taking an actual small p political leadership there?
Oh yeah, the Chautauqua Institution has always been very active with regard to protecting the lake. We are fully aware that the watershed, every place that the water flows from on the land that goes into the lake, is a contributing factor to what the condition of the lake is. And my predecessor, Doug Conroe, he was very active in developing our approach to lake management from Chautauqua Institution standpoint. And we recognized that we own the entire watershed along our shoreline here. We own about 1.5 miles of lakefront, Chautauqua Institution does. And we own all the way up past the golf course to the line where the watershed begins. So he realized that we have a way of protecting the lake all by ourselves, just in our watershed, and by doing watershed projects like rain gardens, tributary stabilization, planting trees that are highly absorptive. They absorb a lot of storm water. And we also have architectural land use regulations that have been created to require property owners, the private homeowners here, to minimize the amount of impervious surfaces that they have on their property, so that it limits the amount of stormwater that ends up going into the lake. The hope is to have it be absorbed so that stormwater doesn't end up in the lake, creating a nutrient flow that feeds the biggest problem on the lake, which is algae, the blue-green algae that we have. That's obviously the biggest problem we have in the lake. And also the macrophytes, the weeds that we have that are a nuisance in some areas. So the institution, with Tom Becker, we were very strong, and our board was very strongly for us continuing to do these kinds of projects on the campus. Doug was instrumental in creating a grant application for the state that gave us money to help us with a lot of our rain garden work and our tributary projects, and also have taken measurements of all of those different projects to see the results. And we've seen a huge reduction in the phosphorus and nitrogen that go into the lake from many of our tributaries. And so the board was behind all of that, and now under our current president, Michael Hill, he's very strong on wanting to continue this policy of being a steward. We call ourselves one of the stewards of the lake because there are many of us. And so we are definitely going to try to take a leadership role in helping to come up with solutions for lake management. We've been actively involved in many levels. In fact, our new strategic plan that we're working on right now at the institution level has the lake as being one of our strongest elements of that strategic plan, where we're going to continue and advance our lake management operations and our lake management involvement as a steward on the lake.
Michael, you've had at the district, you uniquely have, you get your water supply from the lake. That's been forever, and can you tell how that really works?
Oh yeah, we have, there's like a main that goes out into the lake that draws lake water into a pump station down by the lake. It's then pumped from there up to our treatment plant. It's a surface water treatment plant. And it is a very involved process compared to groundwater. Most communities in the area have a groundwater system. There's only one other on the lake that does surface water that isn't private, and that's the Chautauqua Lake Estates. And so we have an unlimited supply of water. I've had a lot of people ask me about wells, like why can't we go to a well in the area? There's not enough water in wells in the area to produce the kind of water that we would need. We pump between 400, 500, 600,000 gallons a day in the summertime. So after it comes from the lake, it goes through our treatment process, which is a very involved process. It goes through a coagulation phase where a chemical is added to get the dirt particles to stick together and the organics all to stick together. Then it goes through a process called flocculation, which is some big paddles essentially that move in different directions at different speeds that cause the now heavier dirt particles that have stuck together to settle out. And then the flow is pushed up through these things called plate settlers in our tank, and they're like a membrane that the water goes up and out of, and the more dirt is attracted to that membrane and then slides off and falls down into the tank. And we have a sludge tractor system that sends the sludge that is collected in the bottom of the tank goes straight to our wastewater treatment facility. From there, the water is pretty clean, but then it goes through a rapid sand filter system with anthracite coal and different layers of sand through a membrane filter into our clear well, where we chlorinate, adjust the pH, and then send it out to our tanks, which are up on the golf course. Anything that's above demand, I should say, goes to our tanks. So it's like a combined system. As we're pumping out, people are using water, it goes to their houses. But anything over that, we're pumping 500-600 gallons a minute roughly, and it goes up to those tanks to fill the tanks, and we keep them pretty full for fire protection reasons and just so we have water storage. That is a much more involved process than groundwater treatment, which is usually just to chlorinate, maybe remove lead or something like that, and then they ship it out to customers that have a groundwater system.
So what's your principal concern, Mike, when the conversations concern on lake management and issues of herbicide use for the lake management aspect of it, as far as your intake of water? How does that work?
Well, the first thing that I need to say is that public health and safety is our utmost concern. And it is something that we all take great pride in. All of us that work with the utility district that are certified water operators, you go through a very strenuous course. To get certified, you have to take a state test. We have to take 30 continuing education credits every 3 years. It's not a joke to us. It's very, very serious to us at public health, because we're before doctors, we're before anybody else. We put out a poor product, people get sick. I mean, we all know about the situation in Flint. Most people don't know about Walkerton, Ontario. Google that when you get home, look at Walkerton, Ontario. Horrible, horrible thing, because the guys that worked at that plant did not do their jobs, and people died, and a lot of people will spend the rest of their life with some horrible conditions because of these guys not doing their job. So we take that very seriously, and any indication that we don't is that's hurtful, actually. So we take great pride in that, and so anything that could contaminate our source is a big concern to us. We are regulated by the state health department. They set up our sampling plan every year. The Department of Health, the county Department of Health, is the one that enforces that. And we have a very large sampling budget, and we are required by law to take a lot of samples per year. In the last 2 years, that has gone up 50%, our sampling budget has, because of the addition of the herbicides. And we took that on ourselves. That wasn't required by the health department. They didn't ask us to do that. We said, there's a possibility of contamination of our water supply. We're going to sample it, and we're going to find out and make sure that there's nothing in there. And we had to overnight sample places. We had to, we spent a lot of money to make sure that our public is safe. And it's, you know, I look at herbicides as a tool along with other entities, as a tool in the, you know, in a toolbox of a proper lake management, you know, plan, I guess I should say. And if it's done effectively and in certain places, I think it can be a great part of helping the whole entire lake. We're not going to turn the lake into a pool overnight. It's not going to happen. In my opinion, it's not good for the health of the lake. But it can be a useful strategy at times. I think that there's a lot of other things that need to be taken into consideration as well. We need to get a sediment from going in the lake. Agricultural stuff needs to be regulated a little better. Wastewater plants, because we are regulated by the government, we have both the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District and our sewer plant. We just went through a $6.9 million upgrade. We are putting out bottled water in the lake. Most of the time there is no detect of any BOD, which is a food source for bacteria. That is, you know, what you send down your sewer. There's no suspended solids. There's no, I mean, we really are putting out really fantastic product out of that plant, all biologically. There's no chemical additions of any kind. It's all done through bacterial process. And so we draw from the lake on one side, and then we send it back to the lake, and we're sending out a lot cleaner than we're taking in, that's for sure. But yeah, you know.
So aside from herbicides, what are you testing for? What's the?
We test for a whole gamut of different things, and it depends on the year. We have samples that we take. We take bacterial samples for the water plant. We take those, and we have so many in the off season and so many during the season that we have to take just from faucets around the grounds that we take to make sure that our water doesn't have any bacteria in it. And we also monthly we test for certain things. Every couple of months we test for other things. Quarterly, 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years. We test for volatile organic carbons, soluble organic carbons. We test for trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, which are cancer-causing agents that happen due to disinfection. So if you use chlorine specifically, that can go out in your system. It can, if there's any organics that end up in your mains, they can cause cancer. So that's something else that we test frequently for. So it just depends on the year. There's pretty strict every month what we test for. And then it just depends on the year, 3 years, 5 years. I think we do lead and copper tests every 5 years. So we have to go out and check and make sure that our water's not corrosive enough that it's leaching copper out of the system, because some people have an issue with copper and in their drinking water, and it can affect their health. So,
John, since you enjoy litigation so much, last year Chautauqua Institution commenced an action against the DEC and various townships concerning the environmental impact statement process, which was dismissed, but not on the substance. It was dismissed on procedural grounds. I just want everybody to know that. What was the impetus to get the attention and to draw, you know, for the administration side to kind of take that action as opposed to maybe jawboning or anything else?
We jawboned the heck out of it. We exhausted every means that we could prior to taking legal action. The process that occurred was with the town of Ellery. They were the lead agent on the process of putting together the applications to apply herbicides to the lake, and as well as the Department of Environmental Conservation, who issued the permits. And so we had tried to meet many times with we did meet many times with the DEC. We attended all of the public meetings for the State Environmental Quality Review Act portion of the community input section of creating a document that was a supplement to 2 prior existing environmental impact statements that were done on the lake. New York State requires a supplemental environmental impact statement on Chautauqua Lake to put together enough documentation and data, scientifically backed data, before they're allowed to issue a permit. And the permit is supposed to be based upon the information that's in the State Environmental Quality Review Act process, which includes people from the community, as well as other entities around the lake, municipalities. People are allowed to participate in the process of asking questions about problems that we see as potential dangers if you're going to put chemical in the lake. We felt that that there were quite a few questions that came that we asked. In particular, we were worried about drift because this is a Class A drinking water lake. It's a very good lake for use of drinking water. And when you start putting chemicals in the lake that have the potential of harmful situations with adults, human beings, children, animals, any of the lake life ecology, it's a big deal. So we participated, went to the sessions, asked questions, and we felt that I'm not a biologist. I'm an architect and a construction manager. I've learned a lot by listening, reading, participating in the projects that we've worked on. So I felt that we needed some additional support for Chautauqua Institution before we came up with all of our questions about this process of putting herbicides in the lake. And so we hired a third-party environmental engineering firm that is an international firm that I just told them to plainly review our questions, review the statements that were made by the town of Ellery relative to the herbicide applications, and give us advice on whether this is a safe process that we're looking at, what kind of questions that we should ask in addition to the ones that we already asked. And so we were part of that process of asking questions, and the town of Ellery's responsibility was to answer those questions using scientifically backed evidence. And along with Chautauqua Institution, there were many other people there. There were 60 plus people and organizations who submitted questions. There were hundreds of questions submitted. And many of the answers that were returned as part of the formal process were very shallow answers. They didn't have scientific substance behind them. Most people of the lake organizations that are working on the lake, that have been working on the lake for decades and decades, attempting to do the right thing for this lake, agreed that this State Environmental Quality Review Act process and this SEIS, Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, was inadequate to make any decisions for something as risky as putting herbicides, chemicals into the Chautauqua Lake. So we kept attending these meetings, asking our questions, sending formal letters in, meeting with the Department of Environmental Conservation, asking them why they're allowing this to happen, and we were getting nowhere. And it became time where we decided we had to do something to at least stop the use of that supplemental environmental impact statement for any future permit applications for herbicides. And as you said, the judge was not against the merit of our case. In fact, she was pretty clear that there was merit to our case. However, the timing is very problematic whenever you have a case like this, because in this particular case, the DEC issued the permits for the first application of herbicides last spring. And within a day, they started applying the herbicides. So our window of opportunity to apply legal action was in that period of time between the permit approval and the application of the herbicides. You couldn't pull that together quick enough. You might be able to, because you're a great lawyer, so you might be able to do that, but we couldn't find anybody who could do it that quickly. So we were outside of that window of opportunity when you're allowed to take legal action, apparently, from what we're told. So the judge pretty much said, wait till there is an action that you can put a petition against. And So what we've done is we've suspended our legal action. It's just suspended right now because we've been working very closely with the county and other lake entities to develop this memorandum of agreement that is very promising, where the county will take leadership. George Barillo and Mark Geis and Pierre Shagnon and Dave McCoy, Don McCord, everybody from the county has been working very diligently with great leadership to pull the lake communities together. Not that we've been fighting. Contrary to what people hear, there is not a big fight going on between all of those lake organizations. There's one organization that doesn't agree with us, and the rest of the organizations, we're on the same page. So to say that we're all fighting, it's nuts. It's in the Post-Journal quite often for some reason that we're fighting. We're not fighting. There's just most of us against another organization that doesn't agree with the way we're working on this. But anyway, the county is putting together this coalition of tenants in this memorandum of agreement that Chautauqua Institution signed on to quickly. It talks about how to manage Chautauqua Lake. And it goes back to a document called the Macrophyte Management Strategy, which was developed over the past several years, but finalized and issued in 2017. And that document is a guideline telling Chautauqua County, people around Chautauqua County, around the lake, how to manage Chautauqua Lake safely and appropriately. And that was all based on scientific data, people getting together and working together. All those people who've worked for decades on this lake contributed to that process, led by the county, which we're all happy about. So they're going back to that document as a guideline, which most everyone agrees to. There are some parts of that people don't agree to. That's part of consensus. You don't agree to 100% of everything, and that's what George Barillo has been saying from the beginning. So we're trying to compromise, and we find it acceptable because it's not risky. It limits herbicide applications to 25% of the lower basin, basically, which is about 500 acres. Currently, the application for herbicides that's pending right now is for about 1,200 acres, which is 200 acres more than it was last year. And we believe that
By the way, just so a clarification, that would fit, even if that application was granted as submitted, it would fit within the memorandum of agreement, the 25%, the littoral thing?
It might not, no.
Okay.
It might exceed it depending on what the Department of Environmental Conservation agrees to issue a permit for. For example, last year, the town of Ellery requested 1,031 acres, I think is what the number was. They ended up getting about 80 plus acres. And that we're happy about. We felt that that was a victory because we were trying to make sure that it wasn't overused. We agree that herbicides should be part of a toolkit and used only in an emergency situation where you have weed infestation that is a serious problem that can't be controlled. And if it's a macrophyte that's an invasive species that is one of the very aggressive types that we want to make sure don't end up in this lake, go ahead and use some herbicides. And also in the Burtis Bay area where it's very heavily weed infested down there. Everybody agrees that there needs to be some work down there. But weed harvesting, mechanical weed harvesting, has been the safest approach and the most effective approach, because what happens is when you apply herbicides to weeds over they call it the littoral zone, where the weeds are, where the fish live basically, you kill all those weeds. Those weeds just float to the bottom, and they contribute to the nitrogen and phosphorus load that's in the lake, and it's called an internal load when it's on the lake bottom. And that load then contributes to the algae growth, the toxic blue-green algae that you see all in the fall mostly, but toward August in that time frame. That's dangerous. That's dangerous to humans, animals, that sort of thing. So if you kill weeds and all that crap floats to the bottom, it's going to feed more weeds and more algae. If you do mechanical harvesting, you're mowing the lawn basically, you're cutting off the top and you're collecting those weeds and disposing of them away from the lake. So those don't become contributing nutrients that feed the phosphorus, the nitrogen, and the algae and the weeds. So the herbicides are okay if you use them targeted and in very specific places. And the macrophyte management strategy that the county has developed specifically said do not use one of the particular herbicides called Navigate. It said don't use that product in Chautauqua Lake. It's not a good product for this lake. And that's one of the elements that have been used the last time and this time. And in fact, what I'm told is that the national or the state parks said not to apply that product anywhere near Long Point State Park. And what does that tell you? It means there's a problem with that product. So we've been asking eliminate that product because it has 2,4-D in it, which some people have attributed to being a benzene ring, which benzene is a potential carcinogen, but you know it depends on how much dilution. Obviously, there's a lot to it. But whenever you have a potential for that kind of risk, we're all for not even putting yourself out there with human life. And so we want to eliminate that product altogether, and the MMS agrees with that. Now, we don't know where it's going to end up as this memorandum of agreement goes forward. Most lake organizations, from my understanding, are signing on to it, and the municipalities. But we're very hopeful and glad that the county has taken this lead role in a responsible approach to watershed and lake management.
Could you explain the memorandum of agreement, which we had just had George and we just had Mark Geist at our last Turner session describe the detail and the hope for that? It seemed like it was the implementation of it and the encouragement to sign it was sort of a carrot and a stick, because the funding was going to go essentially through the Chautauqua Lake Alliance, with some of the applications going through their science group. And you're part of the board of the Alliance. Could you explain a little bit how you think that funding funnel is going to work?
Yeah, I'm not on the board. I'm a founding, Chautauqua Institution is a founding member of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. I attend those sessions, those meetings, and the carrot and stick analogy could be taken that way, and maybe that's a good thing. But the good thing is you have a body of people at the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance that includes most of those lake organizations that have knowledge and scientific abilities to analyze what is the best approach and who should we fund. And so what's happening is the county has allocated funding to the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management and other foundations, the Sheldons, the community foundations, the Lene Foundation. A lot of them have contributed financial support to the lake projects through the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. The Alliance has come up with an effective tool that we all agreed upon that gives you priorities of which projects we should take on. It's a scoring system, and it was a toolkit that was helped. We actually hired a consultant to help develop that toolkit. And that toolkit is pretty accurate when it defines the highest priority projects. And if those projects don't make it on that priority list, they don't get funded. So with the county taking the leadership role of putting the funds in the hands of a representative body like that with a scientific background, we think that's a very good method of distributing the funds.
So what do you think about that, Michael? You agree?
Yes. He's doing so well.
Part of that litigation that was being brought forth against the DEC permit, though, was focused on the water, Chautauqua uniquely getting water from the lake and preserving the quality and that aspect of it. Are you able to see by what happened last year, the impact at all? Do you have metrics or a basis to kind of analyze as you look at and do your testing on the waters?
Well, I mean, all season or through the different seasons, things change. You watch how the lake changes, through temperature and pH and all that as we monitor it. My hope is that if herbicides are to be used, they are used pre-emergently like they're supposed to be, and they're done in April to May, which is a time for us that's not too big a deal for us to shut off our water plant and just use our storage, that we could go a week, maybe 10 days this time of year. We can go without pumping water from the lake, make sure the water's safe that's coming in. You get into late June, early July, that's not a possibility. Like I said, we're pumping 500,000 gallons a day. There's no way we can, stop production unless there's a major issue. So we were very diligent about our sampling last summer and the summer before, just to make sure that if something came in, to our raw water, that we knew we had to shut everything down. But there's still time. There's a lapse of time. You grab your sample, you take it, even if you overnight it, you still don't know the results. These tests take a couple of days. You don't know. That's our concern, is we might not know until after the fact. So that's why if it is to be done, this is the time of year to do it. We're pumping 30,000 gallons a day now. We could shut off for a week, 10 days, and we'd be totally fine. But
And I think this group could not flush the toilet for 10 days. I don't think that's a problem. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, has there ever been any conversation about running, I know it's always dollars, running water from the City of Jamestown Board of Public Utilities up the lake, where that would be a source of water in lieu of drawing it from the lake?
there has been some talk recently that I've heard about, but I haven't discussed it with anybody yet. I know the county was looking into it, but they haven't contacted us to talk about it yet. But I know that they're discussing that, and we would definitely be in favor of at least looking at it. The cost would be astronomical, you know, and they're trying to. They've been talking about sewering the lake for a long time, and that still seems far away. And on parts down here, they're supposedly coming to Stowe, but that still seems far away. So, I mean, if it was a possibility, sure. I mean, it'd be great to have a backup. Like I said, this is an unlimited source of water. If we run out of water here, then we got some other issues, you know. So,
just out of curiosity, your geography for sewering wastewater and stuff like that. Where do you go down to Prendergast Point?
Yeah, like I said, Prendergast Point to Chautauqua Shores is the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer Districts. They own the mains. We just treat their sewage and then bill them back for that. Our sewer area goes from our wastewater treatment facility and above it through the grounds. There are a couple of higher areas along 394, the Highlands, the Woodlands, which are developments in the institution, that those do go back to North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District through Wamita, and they go back that way. So we don't treat the entire institution, but the majority of it we do.
What would you like to see 10 years from now? What do you see any? If you had a unlimited budget, what would you like to see the Chautauqua Utility District look like?
Well, first of all, I'd definitely like to see a cleaner lake. That is, you know, something that I know that we are all concerned about, and we want to help create that. It's going to take some time, though. One big thing that we're going to move forward on with the utility district is we built, you know, just renovated our treatment facility. The next thing we need to do is take care of our infrastructure, especially our sewer mains. There are still a lot of 1890s clay tile mains, and we do have a lot of infiltration from rain events, so we do treat a lot of rainwater, and if we could cut that down. There's great new technologies, and slip lining and stuff have gotten so much better over the last years to save on. We struggle in here. The county wants us to, if we were to replace a water and sewer main, there has to be separation. There's no way you can get 15 feet of separation between a water and sewer main here. You're going to be in somebody's living room and somebody's front porch. It's not going to happen.
That's visual.
So if we can slip line and lessen the cost of excavation and the dangers of excavation, because it is a very dangerous thing, especially areas where we have sewer mains that are 15, 18 feet deep. It's dangerous work. So if we can eliminate that and kind of bring to date our infrastructure is something that I really am going to work towards doing for the utility district. So,
do you have any septic system at all on Chautauqua grounds? Any?
None.
So John, you're Mr. Operations, Mr. Strategic Planning. You've got you got 10-year window here. what's this place going to look like 10 years hence?
Well, we just are finishing up a master plan, a campus master plan that we embarked upon earlier last year. That was a collaborative effort of board members, some community members, executive staff, and it identifies many opportunities for future development at Chautauqua. We were running into situations where people were recommending that we build a structure here or a structure there. We had our own needs, like we're looking at a new maintenance facility because ours is located right at our main entrance and it's in bad shape. But the question has always been, where should you build here and where shouldn't you build here, which could be the most important question. Don't mess up what's a very good environment. So we hired a really excellent firm out of Pittsburgh to work with us and develop a campus-wide master plan that helped us identify the highest and best use for our campus on the grounds here and across the street as well, where our parking lots are, the golf course. And we're going to be releasing elements of that master plan as we go forward. The Board of Trustees has seen it. It's created tremendous energy in the group that's seen it so far. We've reviewed it with certain members of the county and our government in the region, and there's some great interest in what we're planning to do. There's going to be economic impact to Chautauqua County if we're able to do this, but it's also going to really help Chautauqua in the long run. And it'll, like I said, it's going to lay out a roadmap for where we should and shouldn't put our buildings, but also help us identify what we can do to enhance what Chautauqua does already, because we're looking at expanding our season a little bit more each year and increasing our outreach beyond this area, beyond the grounds, to meet up with the mission that we have. And to do that, we have a lot of work to do with our facilities, our accommodations in particular. We need to really provide some better accommodations. And so that master plan is really going to be helpful, and you'll love seeing it. It's exciting. We just haven't released it yet because we want to make sure that everybody that's working on it at this level has had the opportunity to have their input, and then we'll bring it out to the community soon.
I did see a little bit of that plan, and it's just that one huge building in the middle of it, which referred to it as the John Shed. You want?
Hopefully it's not a memorial shed. The other thing with the lake, we want to see a Class A lake 10 years from now. We want this lake to get better. It's already a great lake, but we want to try to see solutions so that we don't have toxic blue-green algae outbreaks. We don't want all kinds of macrophytes in the way of swimmers and that sort of thing. But we don't want it to be a swimming pool. This is an ecologic balance that we're looking for, something that's a healthy lake, a lake that we can all continue to use, because we know that this county depends heavily on this lake for sustenance, from the economic side and from a life standard that we have and expect to have going forward. So we want this lake to be as good as it can be, and without resorting to some drastic measures that could potentially damage the environment in the lake.
Your boss, Michael Hill, said in his release, big picture, hopeful, smiles, that we are confident that with an independently sourced, science-based, comprehensive approach and the support of the leadership of a consensus of stakeholders, we will save and preserve Chautauqua Lake as a source of so much of our livelihood in Chautauqua County. The operative word there was independently sourced, science-based, comprehensive approach. I know that, John, you and others went to Lake George, and part of that was called the Jefferson Project. Is that a model to which you're trying to ascribe, or is that kind of what they're talking about?
It is. It's a piece of a plan. The Jefferson Project on Lake George is a group of people that include Rensselaer Polytech Institute, IBM, and the Fund for Lake George, and the Darren Freshwater Institute, which is located at Bolton Landing on Lake George. It's a group of scientists that have gotten together to create and invent vertical testing devices that test the water quality, the water, everything about the water. It takes about 500 measurements that include, wind velocities, the phosphorus and nitrogen, all kinds of things that we could use the data from to then come up with a plan of attack to start preventing toxic blue-green algae and preventing some of the nuisance macrophytes. And the model that they've created it's a scientific group that is only coming up with data. It's not coming up with recommended solutions. It's giving us the data for Lake George, for example. They've extended it to Skinny Atlas Lake, which is much more similar to Chautauqua Lake. So we went, the county had a contingent with us. We went out to Lake George and met with these wonderful scientists. One of our Board of Trustees members, Dee Dee Treffs, she actually was with IBM, and she helped connect us with these people because of her awareness of our interest in preserving our lake. And so we went out and found out all about the 300 million measurements that these devices are taking around the lake to generate models, computer simulations and models of what happens to a particle when it's put into the lake or when it is in the lake through a tributary, where it ends up, how it interacts with the bottom, the internal load of the phosphorus and nitrogen on the bottom, when the wind blows and the waves on the surface start to move, how that affects the bottom, and what happens when those two converge. They seem to think that creates toxic blue-green algae at that location. So if we can come up with predictive models to find out what's causing these things, we can do a much better job of attacking them. So we've invited that contingent to come out here. Since we visited them, they're coming out here May 6th, and they're meeting with us again. We're going to talk about the next steps. We've already signed a memorandum of understanding with them and that lake organization around Lake George that we want to try to create as a statewide understanding of how to approach lake problems and bring that technology to Chautauqua Lake so that we can get our own data and information, and hopefully, again, that's part of that third-party, unbiased scientific data, because right now the environment around the lake is people don't trust some of the data that's coming out because there are political motivations behind what some people want to do with this lake. And we want it to be unbiased, and I think most people would like it to be pure science. So that's the idea behind that project.
So Michael, last word, what's the question you were expecting that I would ask that I haven't? When you explained to your wife what was happening tonight and said, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't ask the one about the party that we,
I figured you'd ask me a little bit about blue-green algae, and how it affects our water treatment facility. And the state started requiring us to sample for it a couple years ago. And it's always, when the algae gets worse as the summer goes on, and near the end of the summer, there has been days where our turbidity is dirt particles in the water, and it goes through the roof, and we have to stop production and we pump it back to the lake because we don't want to contaminate our system, and up until a couple of years ago, they weren't requiring us to sample for it. We started sampling a couple of years ago for it. We had one sample that came back with a little elevated bit of the mitocystin, or whatever it's called. That's the toxic part of it. And the state received those results on a Friday afternoon. It was nowhere near the maximum contaminant level the state has set. It was a little elevated, but they received the results late on a Friday afternoon, and they kind of panicked. They figured over the weekend nobody was going to pay attention to it, that it might be a problem where it steadily increases like it does a lot of times. Once we start to see the algae, then it gets worse before it gets better. And they sampled the very next day, the day after that, a couple days later, and all those tests came back completely undetected. So, and since then, in the last 2 years, we've had samples that came in at twice the amount in our raw water of the toxin, and our water treatment facility has been able to remove them completely. It is a very effective facility for removing that. It's still something that we're concerned about and we want to look into. There's no question, but and it has been very effective at taking care of that toxin. We were required to put out a little statement that just said, hey, this is an elevated thing. You might want to consider not consuming it, for a period till we get another sample back. But samples are like, your biggest fault with a sample is the sampler usually, and sometimes you have bad samples, and that's why if we were to have a bad bacteriological sample on a faucet, you resample, you sample taps up and down from it, so that you know that maybe it was just poor sampling, maybe it was an unclean bottle, maybe it was, it could be an X number of things, poor lab procedures, it could be a lot of things. So they were very adamant. The state was about retesting a bunch of times, and they all came back negative. So we knew that we were pretty safe after that. And since then, like I said, we've had really elevated samples on our raw side, and they've been clean coming out. So our plant is doing a very good job removing it. So
That's good. That's good assurance. So John, you got the final word. Final word. What is it that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure that message gets out to this crowd?
Come to Chautauqua. You'll love it. This place is paradise. We have programming here that's outstanding programming. We have some outstanding guest performers coming and speakers. We have so many great performances, but people come here also just for the environment, to be here, to walk in the pleasant environment. People say that there's no place like it on earth, and we want to try to keep it that way. And it's a philanthropically supported institution, and that means a lot because the people here who live here and come here contribute to what happens here, and they feel ownership, and we appreciate that ownership, and we try to steward that ownership with these people to help make things better every year. So this institution is a very special place internationally. I mean, people know about this place all over the world, and we want you to come and understand that we're trying to make improvements every year. Philanthropic donations help. It's just a big lift. There's a lot to do here, and we're trying to make it the best in class, and so we want to keep doing that.
Before we sing Kumbaya, let's thank Michael and John so much. Thank you.